Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Rich Habits Podcast, a top 10 business podcast on Spotify. My name is Austin Hankwitz, and I'm joined by my co-host, Robert Croak. Robert is a seasoned entrepreneur in his 50s with lifetime revenues of $300 million, and I'm an entrepreneur in my late 20s with a background in finance and economics. Since quitting my full-time job in corporate finance a few years ago, I've built a 7-figure media business and actively advise some of the most well-known fintech companies around the world. As the show name might suggest, every episode, we talk about rich habits as they relate to business, finance, and mindset. However, we try and bring you two unique perspectives. One from an industry veteran, which is Robert, and the other, myself, someone who's still in the process of building wealth and figuring it all out. So, Robert, what are we going to be talking about in today's episode?
In this episode of the Rich Habits Podcast, we're going to break down the blueprint stage by stage to help anyone listening struggling to get to the next level with their finances and stop living paycheck to paycheck. Listen to this. 62% of Americans making more than $100K are living paycheck to paycheck right now as we speak, and that includes 36% of people making over $250K a year are also living paycheck to paycheck. So this is a serious episode. We're going to break it down, and we're going to help a whole lot of you figure it out.
And if you're someone out there saying, wait a second, $100,000 now doesn't buy you as much as it did back in 2019, you're right. But if you're living paycheck to paycheck, you should definitely consider taking the steps that we talk about in today's episode. Robert, we have the Rich Habits Network, and someone actually sent me their budget via DMs a couple days ago, and they were taking home $15,000 a month, which is $180,000 a year, and they were still living paycheck to paycheck. They couldn't figure out where their money was going. So this episode, I think, is going to really hit home for a lot of people, not just the ones that are making below that, call it 60, 70,000 a year, but a ton of people who are making over 100,000 as well.
I see it every day. I had a one-on-one consulting call with a couple a few weeks back. They were making $270,000 a year collectively, and they were living paycheck to paycheck, and they were only investing $200 a month towards their future, and they have 3 kids. And that is why this episode is so impactful for so many people, because I think a lot of people, both single and married couples, do not even realize they're living paycheck to paycheck, because I know it sounds really harsh, but it's just so factual that if you're not putting away money consistently every month and feeling comfortable where you are, you're living paycheck to paycheck, and that's why we're here to fix it.
Starting with point number 1 is to figure out where all your money is going. As many of you know, we always encourage our listeners to create what we call an honest budget. For us, this means getting out that pen and paper and digging into those bank and credit card statements and just really auditing your monthly spending. Before the month begins, you need to know where every single dollar that you're going to earn is going to be spent. Full stop. Period. You have to know what's going to happen. If you do not have this type of visibility into your monthly spending, this episode is your wake-up call. We really encourage all of you that want to nerd out and dig deeper into this subject to listen to episode 80, How to Be Intentional with Your Money. It is an awesome breakdown. Now, once you've figured out exactly how much you're making each month, but more importantly, how much you're spending every month, it's time to set financial goals.
If you want to get out of this vicious cycle of living paycheck to paycheck, it is time to set financial goals. The most important financial goal you need to set for yourself is saving 15% of your monthly take-home pay. There is no other option. You have to do this. You have to take it seriously, and you have to be consistent. And this might sound daunting at the moment, but we're going to share with you a playbook of how to achieve it, starting with calculating your debt-to-income ratio. And here's how to do that. Add up all of your monthly debt payments. For example, it might be $1,500 for some of you with your car payment, your student loans, and maybe some personal debt. Then divide that number into your monthly take-home pay. So if you were to take, for example, $1,500 divided by $4,000, that would lead you to a 37% debt-to-income ratio. Now, generally, 35 to 40% should be the top of the range you land within, not including your mortgage or your rent. And I always say you either have an income problem or a spending problem or potentially both, And here is when that changes right now, here today.
And Robert, if your debt to income ratio is above that 40% mark, it's time to maybe start thinking about selling the car you can't afford, or maybe aggressively pay down that high interest personal loan, or maybe even pick up a side hustle that allow you to earn more money every month. The reason why we think that you need to understand your debt to income ratio is because that is what you have control over immediately. If you are spending $1,500 a month servicing debt, and if you get rid of the debt, congratulations, you now have freed up $1,500 a month in your budget. Now, we know there's a ton of different types of debt. Interest rate matters a lot, and we're not Dave Ramsey. But what we are is cognizant that 15% of your take-home pay needs to be saved and invested. And the only way you're going to achieve that is by increasing your income or by paying off your debt. So by understanding your debt to income ratio, you now have a clear playbook as to how you can achieve that 15% in savings.
And this might not be easy, because so many of you, maybe you just got married, you have a small child, you have a mature family. You can't always reduce your monthly expenses, but what you can do is give up something to create more income. And I know it sounds daunting and it sucks to think about you're going to go out and you're going to get this new side hustle. But guess what? You have to be able to be willing to do it for your family, for yourself, to get you out of that rut of living paycheck to paycheck. And a side hustle might only be 4 hours of Uber driving every Saturday afternoon or every Sunday afternoon to be able to put away $500 or $1,000 a month to help you get out of this situation. And I'm not saying you're going to do it forever, but you have to be willing to make that commitment, because you cannot kick the can down the road forever and live paycheck to paycheck too long, because you will never get ahead and get yourself set up and your family set up for retirement.
And by making the goals that Robert and I are laying out right now and giving yourself something to work toward, you now have a little bit of extra drive inside of you when you are driving Uber or delivering for DoorDash, whatever that side hustle might be for you. You're saying, I'm earning this money so that I can pay this off, so that I can have a little bit more as it relates to building an emergency fund, something we'll get into later. But Robert, walk us through point number 2.
Stop investing if you can't afford it. And I want to make sure everyone is taking notes, because this one is so critical in this episode. I've been saying for years, you can't out-invest high-interest debt, and that's why this section is so important to understand if you're living paycheck to paycheck. Of course, we want our listeners to become investors and build that $100,000 base we always talk about, but if you're caught in the cycle of living paycheck to paycheck, all that should matter to you right now is getting out. I do one-on-one calls every single day with people who are buying cryptocurrencies, they're buying single stocks, and they're even investing in real estate while carrying massive amounts of high-interest debt. And this doesn't make financial sense. The average interest rate on credit card debt right now is 30%, and the average annual return of the stock market is 10%. This really illustrates the fact that in general, you're not going to be able to out-invest high-interest debt. So by not paying that debt off first, you're borrowing at 30% interest to potentially make 10% in the stock market. This is a huge no-no and will definitely deflate your chances of being able to build that wealth for the future, because you got to take care of these high-interest debts first.
And I think, Robert, something people often forget about when it comes to, out investing high interest debt is their 401k. I hear all the time, Austin, Robert, of course I have to invest in my 401k. I got to get that match. I got to invest toward my retirement, all those fun things. I can't stop doing that. Of course you can stop doing that. You absolutely can pause your investing in your 401k for 6, 12, or 18 months and use that extra $250, $350, $450 a month that was going toward your 401k to begin to pay down that high interest debt. Do not fall for the trick of thinking, if I'm not investing every pay cycle to my 401k, I won't retire wealthy. How you will retire wealthy is being able to hit that 15% savings rate in your monthly budget, giving you the flexibility now to build a lot of wealth over time, and that might come with some short-term sacrifices. You 100% have our permission to pause your retirement investing, 401k, Roth IRA, whatever else, to pay off that high interest debt.
I love it. And it's just one of those things For all of you listening, I know it stinks. You're looking at your credit card debt. It's 12 grand, 18 grand, 22 grand. You've got some money coming in. It's sitting in your high yield savings. You're really interested in buying some Bitcoin or Ethereum because you know the markets are going up. But guess what? Getting a 30% return by paying off those credit card debts is a fantastic place to be, because guess what? They're never going to stop giving you credit, and they're going to keep raising your limits to keep you roped in. And our goal is to get you out of that position so you have some room to breathe.
So now that you've built the budget, you understand where all your money's going, you know what's going to come in, you understand what's going out every month, you've really figured out, wait a second, I am really living paycheck to paycheck here. I need to figure out my debt to income ratio. I need to maybe sell the car I can't afford, pay off some of this debt that, I've just kind of been ignoring for a little bit. Maybe you need to up the income, right? Drive a little bit of Uber or DoorDash, or maybe do what I did when I was in my early 20s, sell websites to dog groomers in Nashville. Literally, that's what I did to make some extra cash. So there's a ton of different ways that you can kind of change this debt to income ratio and boost your monthly budget. You're now even maybe pausing that retirement investing, allowing you to have a little extra more money. But now you have to figure out, how am I going to prevent this from happening in the future? And that is point number 3, having an emergency fund and being able to expect the unexpected. Because again, the only reason you're living paycheck to paycheck is because you're spending more than you make. Sometimes that's because you have an income problem, but more than likely it's because you might have a spending problem. Now, we are super empathetic to emergency situations like a visit to the hospital, or your car breaking down, or maybe your AC unit goes out. You have to fix those things and tend to those problems. And for all you parents that are listening, that might mean a last minute extra cost for a kid's sports or maybe a tuition hike. There are a ton of things that will be looked at as an emergency in your budget. But if you are not financially prepared, those emergencies are true emergencies. If you have a $5,000, $10,000, maybe even a $15,000 emergency fund set aside in a high yield savings account, those unexpected expenses now go from emergencies into inconveniences. And so when it comes to preventing yourself from going back into the cycle of paycheck to paycheck, having a little bit of buffer between you and life is incredibly important. And I like to call that buffer my emergency fund.
And the main point here is we don't want you to be paying for these types of expenses with high interest debt and then not have the money in your checking account to pay it off, causing you to carry this debt into the following months. Whether it's a true emergency or simply a new expense from your ever-changing life, it needs to be considered in your budget. So when you get hit with this new bill like Austin alluded to, maybe they raised the school fees, the tuitions, or a sports program went up just a ton. We never know what's going to hit us, and the goal here is to make sure that you are prepared. So once that emergency hits, don't forget to begin budgeting for it every month going forward if it's a price hike or something you can begin to predict. And then again, it takes it out of being an emergency and puts it into that budget issue where you have to continue to budget for it and be prepared for it. In other words, a budget is a living, breathing thing. You are constantly responsible for assessing your current budget as well as considering how that budget might change in the future, because we all know life gets in the way, and we are definitely considering that in this podcast.
Living paycheck to paycheck is really, really hard. I definitely had a time in my early 20s where I was living paycheck to paycheck and I had credit card debt myself. And I escaped that by bringing my spending down and by boosting my income. Again, I had a side hustle, and from a spending down perspective, I had to make the hard choices of saying, hey guys, I can't afford to go out to the restaurants and the bars and go to those fun things with you for the next probably 6 or 8 weeks. I've got to really get my spending under control. Or I can't afford, Robert, my at the time 2015 Lexus IS 250 that was a $700 something a month car payment. I sold that car so I could get rid of the car payment, and I bought a cheaper car that brought my overall spending down by like $600 a month. This is the type of sacrifices you have to make if you're living paycheck to paycheck. And the number one piece of advice I could give anyone living paycheck to paycheck right now is to forget what your friends think about you, forget what society says, forget what other people think you should be doing. Focus on you and what goals you want to achieve for yourself as it relates to your financial journey.
It's so true. I know it stinks when you think about, you've got the new BMW and maybe you've got the new Jeep Cherokee in the driveway. Well, guess what? If there's a way to not have 2 brand new cars, and maybe you take a little bit of that money and go buy a used car or a used SUV and keep one of the new cars, there are a lot of different sacrifices you can make to get yourself in line. Just remember, sometimes to escape living paycheck to paycheck, you have to go backwards before you can go forwards. I know that doesn't sound fun, but it's okay. We've all had to do it. And if you're willing to make these sacrifices now, it's going to set you up so much better later on, because as long as you let lifestyle creep continue and you never set aside anything for the future, you're never going to escape this matrix of living paycheck to paycheck, and it's a terrible place to be.
You are an adult, you're listening to this episode, it's time to devise a plan of getting out of the vicious cycle of living paycheck to paycheck and to stick to it. We're rooting for you. 2025 is right around the corner. It's going to be your year, and we can't wait to see all the change you make in your personal finance journey. Now, this episode of the Rich Habits Podcast is brought to you by Neos Investments. They just launched a new addition to their high-income ETF lineup that provides exposure to the 2,000 small-cap stocks that make up the Russell 2000 index while aiming to provide tax-efficient monthly income to investors. Their ETFs may be especially interesting for folks looking to generate passive income inside of their investment portfolios.
As you've probably heard us mention recently, small cap stocks have historically performed well when rate cuts begin after a period of high interest rates. So if you're looking to add passive income-focused ETFs to your portfolio, especially as the Federal Reserve may begin cutting interest rates in the coming months, consider learning more about Neos ETFs at neosfunds.com. As with all investments, investors should carefully consider their investment objectives, risks, charges, and expenses of Neos exchange-traded funds before investing. To obtain a prospectus containing this and other important information, please visit neosfunds.com and please read the prospectus carefully before you invest.
An investment in Neos ETFs involves risk, including possible loss of principal. The equity securities purchased by the funds may involve large price swings and potential for loss. Past performance is no guarantee of future results.
And by the way, we are doing another webinar with the folks from Neos that we are super pumped about. It's going to be on Thursday, October 17th at 4 p.m. Eastern Time, and we're going to be talking about how all the Fed rate cuts are impacting the markets today and in Q4. And we'll be sure to drop a link in the show notes to sign up.
I can't wait for the webinar. Troy and Garrett are some Wall Street veterans here that are joining us, and I'm just so excited to see what they think about the Fed's rate cuts and how things might begin to get a little bit more turbulent as we head into another election. Now, our first question comes from Blake. Blake says, I'm 18 years old and I graduated from high school in May. I chose not to go to college and now I co-own a construction company with my dad. I have about $40,000 in savings. $35,000 of that is invested into the ETFs you all talk about, with $5,000 as an emergency fund, and I drive a paid-off Toyota Tacoma. I'd make roughly $150,000 to $200,000 a year. I still live at home in order to save money because I want to invest. I'm very interested in owning rental properties. I want to build my own quadplex for myself to live in and rent out the 3 other spaces, but is it smart to make such a large financial move at such a young age? My dad's almost 60 and I plan to inherit 20 properties when he dies. I want to make more and more passive income so that I can retire early. But the main question is it financially smart to maybe go out and build my own quadplex and only have to pay for the labor and materials, or will it put me in a hole of debt while I'm young and hurt myself in the future financially? Wow, what a really cool situation to be in, Blake. Robert, I'll let you take this one.
So Blake, you're probably not going to love this answer. I'm so excited that you're crushing it. It seems your dad has really helped set you up at an early age. I love that you're getting money set aside to build that base and you're excited about building your quadplex. But here's what I would do. I would instead not build the quadplex yet. I would get my base fully built, get more money into that, let's call it overall strategy of what you're working towards for retirement. And then maybe if you want to buy your first property on your own, start a little smaller. Because here's why. Let's say you're going to build a quadplex. You go find the land. You got to get the land set up and ready. Then you have to build the quadplex. Many times this is going to cost more money than you think and take longer than you think to get it completed because you never know the unknowns of what can happen in real estate. So maybe look at going and buying just a duplex that's a quick fixer-upper. You can do a lipstick remodel. You could live in that for now. But I wouldn't rush into building your first quadplex. It sounds awesome, but based on how much money you have set aside right now, it could drain all of that. And then if you have delays or overtures in your expenses, then you could put yourself in harm's way to where then all of a sudden on your very first try on your own, you're going out to borrow money from your father, or you might have to raise capital to finish the project. And I don't want to see that happening because you have such a great start. So personally, I'd build the base further. I would keep living at home. I would keep trucking along and building up your funds, and then look to build that quadplex later. Because let's look at it this way. To buy the land and build a quadplex in almost any market, you're probably going to be $700,000 to $1.4 million, maybe higher to do that. And I just think that's a little out of your reach right now to do it by yourself.
So the only thing I would change, Robert, is I think Blake, now making $150,000 to $200,000 a year and having some savings and obviously this money in stocks, I think he needs to make a plan to move out. The phrase is, an eagle that never leaves the nest turns into a turkey, and I don't want Blake to turn into a turkey. Blake, you are making more than enough money to go find your own apartment, to build your routines, to teach yourself how to cook and do your own laundry. Like, there's some sort of dignity that comes when you live on your own. And doing that at maybe 19 or 20 years old could be a really great goal to give yourself. I'm not saying you need to move out tomorrow or in the next 3 or 6 months, but I do think that you should make a goal for yourself to move out over the next, call it 12 to 24 months, because that will give you now a sense of dignity, a sense of pride and self-worth that it just doesn't come with living with your parents. And now I understand, you might say, hey, I'm saving $2,000 a month by living with my parents. Cool, you make $200,000 a year. Cry me a river. You're going to be just fine, I promise.
I love it. That's why we're here, is to give two different approaches and two different perspectives on what the best thing is. I remember I bought my first quadplex at 23 years old. I lived in one unit. I let the tenants pay the mortgage. It was fantastic. And I held that property for probably 20 years, and it was a great winner for me. But I didn't know what I know now. In retrospect, I would have never bought that property first because at the time I only had around $50,000 in capital, and I exhausted all of it to buy the property, close on the property, and renovate the property. And I even got a loan on top of that. And I don't wish that on anyone. It worked out for me, but it doesn't work out for most people.
I totally agree. I mean, Blake, move out, grind until you're 24 years old. And by that, I mean, continue to work hard in your dad's company that you co-own, continue to make all the money you can, put that money in the markets, max out your retirement accounts, do everything you can as a young man. And then once you're in that, call it 23, 24, 25, do what Robert said. You've got your base built in its entirety. You've got hundreds of thousands invested. You've got, tens, if not hundreds of thousands ready to be deployed into real estate in a responsible and profitable manner, right? That's when you should begin making those moves. I agree. I think Robert was right here. You are a little bit more on the early side to take on this much risk. With that being said, too, something else kind of unrelated that I wanted to share is, how cool is it that Blake's dad did everything right? I mean, we hear about the term generational wealth. And then when Blake over here, who's an 18-year-old who's now making all this money, he's living at home, he wants to do all these cool things, people are probably like, oh yeah, Blake, his daddy hooked him up, right? His dad did it all for him. He's daddy's boy. Heck no. Blake's dad did everything right. We all want to give our children the opportunity to make a ton of money and be wealthy and pass on everything of the hard work and all the assets that we've acquired throughout our lives. But as a society, we make fun of people who receive that, right? They were a baby with a silver spoon in their mouth. They never had to work for it. No, I'm a big proponent here into Blake's dad. He did everything right. He's setting his family up for generational success, and I could not be happier for Blake.
I agree. And I really like that outlook that you just proposed, because so many people, there are a lot of children out there that are coming into adult age whose parents set them up and they still screwed it up, and they did not take advantage and accelerate what their parents helped them do. And that's why I think it's so important to understand getting that extra boost, although not all of us were able to get that and had the benefit of that, doesn't mean you're still destined for success. You still have to run with the ball. And that's why I love Blake is taking it serious at an early age. He's really working hard, and I would just keep my foot on the gas, keep doing what you're doing, and just delay building on your own till you get a little further along and have that base built. And that way I'd feel more comfortable that you can't go broke and start over because you went too soon.
Our next question comes from Rebecca. She says, I recently started listening to your podcast, and I love the two perspectives on everything. My question is about Robert's positive arbitrage position. I've always shared the same belief, but I've always compared that to the guaranteed returns with fixed income rather than the S&P 500's average return of 8 to 12%. So my question is, why put money at a risk of losing when the market is down when you could get a guaranteed return of 5 or 6% on fixed income?
Yeah, Rebecca, this is a great question, and I appreciate the call out on this. And here's my take on this. Yes, having a guaranteed return of 5 or 6% is great. It's better than doing nothing, and it's better than leaving money sit. But here is how I look at it. I'm a long-term investor, and if I look back 50, 60 years at the S&P 500, year over year, it's going to average 10, 11, 12%. So I feel like that's pretty guaranteed. I'm not going to bet against the U.S. stock market and U.S. companies because I believe over time, I'm going to crush it at that 10, 11, 12, 14% return. So for me, I want to optimize my gains year in and year out. Now, some people can say, well, we're going into a down economy. I want to have this guaranteed return. That is totally fine. But the problem here is no advisor and nobody on earth can time the market. Last year and 2 years ago, there were tons of people on TikTok and Instagram saying, put your money in cash. We're going into a recession. Sit on the sidelines. Yet in 2023, my accounts did over 40% return. And I know Austin's were right up there with me. So it's really difficult to look at it and sit on the sideline because you're worried and you want to have that guaranteed return. So for me, I'd rather have a little more risk because I figure it this way. The stock market, specifically the S&P 500, is going to go up and to the right over time. And if I'm looking at a 5, 10, or 20-year time horizon, I would much rather have some risk to be able to make 10, 12% a year than have a guaranteed 5%, because over 10 years, if I outperform you, let's say 6% a year for 10 years, because I took that risk in the U.S. stock market, that is 60% more return I'm going to make on my money than having the guaranteed return. That's why I always talk about if you can borrow money cheaper than what you can make with it, you borrow, and you always put yourself in a position where the positive arbitrage is in your favor. That's it for me. It has worked for me for decades, and I think it can work for you.
Robert, I love what you said here, and I don't know the specific stat. I'm trying to find some stuff here on Google as we record, but long story short, the stat goes like this. It doesn't matter. You can pick any day during the year that you want. You can buy the stock market, the S&P 500, and if you close your eyes and wait 10 years, there's like 100% chance it's going to be higher than it is when you bought it. Doesn't matter if you bought the top, the middle, the bear market, whatever, right? History tells us the S&P 500 goes up over a long enough period of time by about 10% per year. And so to your point, Rebecca, if you want to get that 5 or 6% because you're trying to position yourself for some volatility and you've already built your base and you're trying to do a little bit of active management of your portfolio, that's fine. But what we're trying to really encourage people to do is when it comes to opportunity cost, your opportunity cost is the long-term returns of the S&P 500. So if you can get some positive arbitrage on your money by having allocation to that, it's probably a good idea to do it.
I love it. I love it. I love it.
Now, Robert, this episode of the Rich Habits Podcast is brought to you by Monarch Money. Speaking from personal experience, I know exactly how stressful and time-consuming managing your finances can be. Between building a budget and keeping tabs on your expenses across different credit cards, no wonder people are too afraid to start.
Yes, Monarch Money makes it simple and easy to connect the dots across all of your spending habits, no matter how many financial institutions you might use. Monarch Money tracks where your money is and where it's going, all in one simple-to-understand dashboard. From net worth tracking to budgeting, Monarch Money makes it simple.
Monarch Money is also customer focused. They're pushing new updates to their app every few weeks and are very active in the r/Monarch Money Reddit community. Customers often submit product suggestions, vote on new features, and can easily view the company's product roadmap ahead.
After checking out Monarch Money for myself, I now understand why it's a top-rated personal finance app. Right now, listeners of the Rich Habits Podcast will get an extended 30-day free trial when you go to monarch.com/habits. That's monarchmoney.com/habits for your extended 30-day free trial. We appreciate them supporting the show and our listeners.
Now, our final question comes from Lorenzo. Lorenzo says, here's my question for the podcast. 3 of my good childhood friends and I are thinking of pooling our money together to buy a house. We live in the Miami area and prices have gone just out of control. I think we all can bring maybe $40,000 to $50,000 together as a down payment, so ideally it would be great to do this for a duplex or even a triplex. What are some tips and advice for us in doing this the right way, considering ownership, setup, loan type, and exit strategies? Robert, I'll let you kick us off.
Lorenzo, this can be good, this can be bad. Couple things to consider. Most loan types are only going to allow up to 4 people on the LLC to be able to buy the property. So keep that in mind. Don't let it slip the 5 or 6 people. It gets tricky in the cap table. Number 2, make sure the paperwork is ironclad, because what you don't want to do is buy it. You guys all pile into one unit, you rent the other unit, and then you find out you don't like somebody. How do you split it up? How do you give them a rebate if they move out? How does that all work? So make sure the due diligence part, you guys sit down with a pen and a pad and make sure all of the details now, when you own the property and you're living in the property, how it is spelled out from a living condition, and even make sure you detail out the common space area details. You know, make sure everyone is clean, make sure everyone eats their own food, make sure all of those things are spelled out, because what you don't want to do is find yourself in court fighting over this property, because I assume you're looking to do it as an investment, but also as a way to live much cheaper in Miami because it's very expensive cost of living. So make sure all of that is spelled out. And then when it comes to exit strategies, again, it's the same thing. You need to spell this out, because 2 of you might want to sell in 2 years. The market goes up. You need money and the property is appreciated $100K. You want to cash in, but someone else may say no, and you don't want to be in a stalemate because it wasn't spelled out in a supermajority vote status or some way to be able to figure out how to do this correctly. That is my experience in it. That is what I would do. I don't think it's a bad idea, but just be very, very careful, because when you start putting 2, 3, 4 grown men together in a building, that can be very, very difficult to make sure that it goes well for the long term.
Robert, you did a great job spelling it out. And in my opinion, you spelled it out perfectly, which now as I think and analyze it, that just sounds like a nightmare, right? You've got all these people. You have to figure out whose food. We're all roommates now. We're all in our maybe, late 20s or early 30s. Maybe someone has a baby. Maybe all these things can go wrong.
They move a girlfriend in and it wasn't spelled out that you can't bring in a significant other. All of it can go wrong, but keep going.
Yeah, I mean, dude, it just sounds like a nightmare, right? The only ship that doesn't sail is a partnership, right? This is exactly that. It sounds like something that is just going to be an absolute mess to figure out. And even the exit strategies things, I mean, think about that for a second, right? To your point, I mean, maybe Miami bounces back and now the duplex or even the single family home that they purchased goes up by $200,000. Someone is ready to go start their life for their family and they need, money to go do and move on and do whatever else. But maybe the other 2 people don't want to do it, so they have to sue. And now, the LLC needs to be dissolved. I mean, this sounds crazy. Don't do this, in my opinion. It just sounds like you're setting yourself up for disaster. If I were you, Lorenzo, I would take that, let's call it $40,000 or $50,000, spend the next 3, 6, 9, 12 months, maybe adding another $10,000, $15,000, $25,000 to that. Interest rates for mortgages are going to begin to come down dramatically as the Fed cuts rates, and maybe your buying power in Miami will be able to be increased. I know a lot of these condos and things like that are beginning to see major, major price cuts in Miami. So I would just personally, if I were in your shoes, Lorenzo, I would think about just buying something for myself, making sure it's exactly what I want, have autonomy over how I want the renovations. If I want to paint my room a different color, I can do it, right? All these things that, to Robert's point, need to be ironclad in a contract with now your childhood friend. So Lorenzo, I'm in the boat of don't do this. It sounds like way too much of a headache.
So Lorenzo, build the base, keep doing what you're doing. Find a hack to lower your monthly burn down. Maybe you go move into somebody else's nice condo or whatever, and you have a contract with them individually, so then that way you can get out of it anytime. But I personally think this is a slippery slope. It's okay to do it if the capital appreciation is there. They're childhood friends, but just make sure you have ironclad documentation and you should be okay.
Everyone, thanks so much for tuning in to this week's episode of the Rich Habits Podcast. If you're living paycheck to paycheck, we hope this episode helped you figure things out and just give you some financial direction. If it's your first time listening to the podcast, be sure to give us a follow. And if you enjoyed listening, don't forget to leave us a 5-star review.
And always remember, if you love these podcasts and you see the value, share it with a friend. That helps us grow. You might have a friend right now that's living beyond their means that doesn't really watch podcasts. Maybe their financial literacy is low. All of this can be a kind gesture of you just sharing with a friend. It helps us grow. You might help one of your dear friends get out of a rut. All of this is helpful, and we appreciate each and every one of you every week. And make sure you check out the Rich Habits Network. We're very proud of it. The newsletter is awesome. The weekly private lives are great, and we just love the school community, so you might want to check that out as well.
Thanks, everyone, and have a great start to your week.